Hi, it's Hopi here with another episode of Raw Hope. Today, production assistant Phoebe and I are being nature girls on the Raw Hope homestead. We're enjoying the sights and the sounds and the smells of our backyard. It's very peaceful out here and we're having a great time today. It's awesome weather. And in a little bit, we're going to harvest some of the greens that we planted in our victory garden last episode. And we're going to use them to make fresh, organic green smoothies that we harvested right from our own yard. So come and join us. So as you can see, our plants have been doing quite a bit of growing since we last put them into this little victory garden. And now they're ready to be harvested. I'm just going to harvest a few leaves per smoothie, and we're just going to make one smoothie right now. And then we'll let the main plant keep growing. I'm not going to pull the whole plant up out of the ground. So we'll start off with some Swiss chard. We got some giant leaves here. I'm going to snip it at the base. This will make a nice addition to a green smoothie. Here we got some Korean shiso. Some really nice big leaves. And we've got some huge dandelion leaves here. Red dandelion, or sometimes known as Italian dandelion. Dandelion is really healthy for you. If you want some more information about dandelion, check out my blog post that I dedicated all about dandelion leaves. I think we'll move on to the next tent and we'll harvest some baby bok choy, which you can see is very happy in its new home. These are really awesome. They have a really nice flavor and there's so much juice in the stems. I love them in salads. They're really crispy and crunchy and juicy. And here we have our harvest, and we're going to bring it inside and make a delicious green smoothie. Now, through the magic of television, we're indoors about to make our fresh, organic green smoothie with our bountiful harvest that we just collected from our own victory garden in the backyard. So these are our ingredients, obviously our fresh, organic greens, and then some frozen fruits. They're organic as well. You don't have to make it with frozen fruits. You can put it with room temperature fruits. You can put it with fruits that have been in the refrigerator. I like to use frozen fruits because it gives it that professional smoothie quality. It has like a iciness to it that kind of melts in your mouth, and it makes it really delicious. So I recommend, and it's also easier and cheaper, believe it or not, to buy frozen organic fruits. You can get them in pretty much most supermarkets. Health food stores have a frozen section with organic fruits, and it's definitely helpful to use the frozen fruits in your smoothie. So what about green smoothies? Well, you may have heard of Victoria Butenko. She is really the founder and the creator of the green smoothie. She realized that even though her family had been long-term raw foodists and they had conquered a lot of their diseases and their illnesses, they sort of hit this plateau where they weren't doing as well anymore, and they almost felt like they were backpedaling. And she did some research, and she found out that the closest mammal to us genetically is the bonobo, which is a type of chimpanzee, and they eat a diet that consists primarily of fruit and greens. So she realized that we don't eat nearly enough greens in our diet, and she was trying to think of a way to get herself and her family to be more enticed by greens. And she figured out that if she blended them together with fruit, it was really delicious and it tasted like a treat, and it wasn't a chore to eat your greens anymore. So in the spirit of Victoria Butenko's green smoothie revolution, we're going to make our own right here. It's really not a science. You don't have to use any specific recipe, and I encourage you to do a lot of experimentation. I like to add berries. I like a lot of cherries and blueberries and strawberries, but you can use any fruit. You can use mangoes, you can use pineapple, you can use citrus fruits, and just experiment with a whole bunch of combinations and see what you really enjoy, because if you enjoy it, then you're more likely to eat it on a regular basis. So we start out pretty much the same way. We're going to add 2 bananas. I need to make a lot. You can make, just half of a blender container full. I like to fill this thing up so that I can share it and I can have some for later if I want. I always start with the fruit first. We're going to add the cherries now. And now the blueberries. I have about 2 cups of each. But again, there's no science to it. You can add a little more, a little less fruit. What usually most people do is, until they start getting used to the flavor of the greens, they add more fruit and then less of the greens. And then as time goes on and they get used to green smoothies and they start to really like them, they start to increase the amount of greens. So to this frozen fruit, we're going to add 3 cups of fresh, I use distilled water, but you can use any kind of filtered water that you want. I do not recommend tap water. And then we're going to blend this up until it's a really nice, smooth, even consistency. A lot of people who are raw foodists tend to not get enough vitamin B12. And one of the recommendations that Victoria Butenko makes is that you don't go crazy when you're washing your greens, when you're rinsing them off, because you'll get vitamin B12 from the organisms in the soil. And also, when she did her research, she found out that chimpanzees eat a moderate amount, actually kind of a small amount, of insects as a supplement to their diet. And if you're not crazy about washing off your greens, you might have a couple little tiny insects in there that you don't really notice. If you notice them, obviously, I don't like to harm any creatures, no matter how small. If I see insects on there, I take them off, little aphids and such, but there's all kinds of living organisms on everything you eat, whether you like it or not. There's bacteria. The plants themselves are obviously living organisms, so you do the best that you can, and you try to live a life where you don't harm other creatures intentionally. But if you do happen to get some extra nutrients from a wayward microscopic insect that you didn't happen to catch, then that's how nature intended it. Putting in our chard. And I really, as I mentioned before, I fill up the entire blender jar. I like to have a lot. Sometimes I bring some to work the next day. You can keep these in the refrigerator overnight. I don't recommend you keep them for too long. It's much better to have it fresh. But I would rather eat a day or a 2-day-old smoothie than something really not healthy. So if you have the choice of, making something ahead of time for work the next day, I recommend doing that instead of going out and having like McDonald's for lunch or something like that. So now we're going to blend it up. So now you can see that it's blended to a really nice, smooth consistency. It's really professional quality. I'm mentioning that if you really want to make a lot of smoothies or a lot of raw food dishes, you really should invest in a high-speed blender at some point. This one is a Vitamix. I prefer this particular brand of blender. And if you're interested in taking the plunge and getting yourself a high-speed blender, you can order it through my blog. There's a link there and you'll get free shipping. So if you're considering it, I do recommend it. And if you're not going to do it until later in the future, just keep it in the back of your mind that it's something you might want to invest in and save up for. So now we're going to pour it. And you can see we call them green smoothies, but they're not always green. Depending on what kind of fruit you have in there, sometimes they're purple, sometimes they're red, sometimes they're orange. But they're always delicious. Our producer, Gotti, just sampled the smoothies and said they were really good, but what I really want to do is try a taste test with our production assistant, Phoebe, and see what she thinks about it. It looks like it's a hit. I think you should try this in your own home. I think you should grow your own victory garden and make your own green smoothies. Try them out. You're really going to enjoy them. Subscribe to my YouTube page and check out my blog. See you again soon for another episode of Raw Hope.